Hey everyone, welcome back to the Level Up webinar series. My name is Jasmine and I'm an ironSource's marketing team. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, Katie Gold, our product marketing manager here at ironSource, is going to be teaching you how to A/B test your ad monetization strategy. Before we get started, I wanted to take a few seconds to tell you a bit more about what we're doing here at ironSource. ironSource is developing the industry-leading growth engine for games. We reach 2.7 billion engaged players a month, and our ad mediation platform is #1 in the market for game developers. A lot of what we've been talking about in these past webinars is how to close the monetization and marketing loop. And the solutions we develop here at ironSource, like the A/B testing tool we're about to talk about, are meant to do just that, so that game developers like you can really accelerate growth. If you want to learn more about the solutions we're building at ironSource, you can head to www.ironsrc.com. We'll also be sending out a copy of Katie's deck as a recording of the webinar tomorrow, so watch out for it. And if you want to check out past webinars, head to ironsrc.com/webinars. Okay, that's it from me. Katie, on to you.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. I'm really excited to talk to you about our A/B testing tool. For me, it's one of our most robust features that we have on the mediation platform, and I hope that today you can learn a lot and take away some really great action items. So in this session, we're talking about our A/B testing tool and how you can use it to test your ad monetization and then implement the strategy that maximizes revenue and user LTV. Our agenda for this session is: what is A/B testing and why is it important? What can you test with ironSource's tool? How to set up A/B tests, some best practices for A/B testing, and then we'll take some of your questions. So what is A/B testing and why is it important? A/B testing, or split testing, is the practice of testing different experiences in your app and then determining which experience performs best. Here at ironSource, our focus is to help you understand which ad monetization approach is strongest. So why is A/B testing important? There are 3 main reasons. First is that it reduces the risk. We've been told a lot of times that it's scary to implement new ad units or new monetization ideas because you don't want to influence too much of the user experience and it's really risky. For example, showing interstitial or banners to users who have never seen them before might have a really bad effect on retention. Or if you change the reward amount that a user earns, it could really imbalance the game economy. With A/B testing, you can test these ideas on only a small subset of users first, so you really understand the effect before you roll it out to all your users. Second, A/B testing increases revenue and maximizes LTV. The goal of A/B testing, if it's with ads or any other component of your app, is to create the best user experience that generates the most revenue. At ironSource, all of our products here are to help you maximize LTV, and the A/B testing tool is one of the strongest tools that we have to help you do that. Third, A/B testing can help you make data-driven decisions. No one wants to make decisions about their app just based on gut instinct or also based on what other publishers have told you is successful for them. Each game is different, so you want to use data to choose the best strategy. We provide you data like revenue, retention, and ARPDAU to help you do that. So what are some of the things that you can test? We've come up with a lot of ideas for use cases, which I will share with you today. And the A/B testing tool is integrated into all aspects of our platform, so you really have a lot of options and freedom to run all kinds of different tests. The examples I'm going to give you, I put into 4 main categories: ad units, segments, content, and waterfalls. We'll start with the ad units test. The first example is activating a new ad unit. Using what I said previously, sometimes it's a little hard to integrate interstitial units or banner units to users who are not used to having ads forced into their face without opting in. So it's a little risky. What you can do is you can expose these new ad units to only a small group of users and see how it affects those metrics. Does retention go down? Does revenue go up? You want to test it for sure. The second example is pacing and frequency of ads. This is most relevant for interstitials, as you want to make sure you're showing it to users enough, but not too much. So what you can do is you can test showing it more often and less often to find the right balance and how that will affect the revenue and retention of your users. Third is implementing new placements. This is more specific for rewarded video, but you want to have a good diversity of placements for users to opt into video. Depending on the kind of game you have, this could be rewarding a new life, it could be rewarding a certain currency, you could reward a daily gift or maybe more time or less time. Either way, you want to make sure that each placement is affecting the game economy and helping improve all of your main metrics. So rolling out a test is always a great place to start. Lastly, you can also change rewards. Sometimes you'll see that a video placement isn't getting the amount of engagement you would expect it to. That could be due to the reward not being very valuable to the user. So before you just up the reward, you might want to test it first. See if changing the reward actually affects engagement, and see if that will help improve everything. Now we're going to move on to the segments. A segment is when you group different users, when you group users together and they all share the same characteristic. You can combine the segments tool you have in our platform along with A/B testing to put some really meaningful tests together. The first is paying versus non-paying users. An easy example is showing interstitial ads to non-paying users. You definitely want to test that first before you do it. The next is player progression reward amount. Depending on the user and how far they've made it into your game, they might have accumulated a lot more currency than new users in your game. So therefore, maybe watching an ad for a low amount of currency isn't rewarding to them. So depending on the player, you might want to increase the reward amount the further they are in your game to keep them engaged. The last example is you can have different caps for users in different countries. This is very dependent on how each country monetizes and how those users engage. But an example here is that with your tier 3 countries, where users might have lower ARPUs, you can open up caps to help monetize them more. Now we'll move on to content tests. One of the first you can do is the X button behavior on interstitial ads. You can show the X button at 5 seconds versus 10 seconds, for example. Will that help with conversion of users on the ad? Will it actually harm retention? These are very easy things to test to find the right balance. You can also run competitor blacklist tests. We have many publishers that block competitors due to a fear of harming retention, which totally makes sense. But their competitors are willing to pay high eCPMs and very good money for your users. So before you block them or show them, what you could do is you could show competitors and compare retention and revenue earned to those users who are not seeing competitors. Or to take that test to the next level, you can combine it with the segments tool and try showing competitive ads to only non-paying users. Next are waterfall tests. Waterfall tests can be tricky and sometimes very fickle. Network performance depends on a lot of different factors. So if you do some tests, they might not always have the same results. For example, testing one network against another network in a priority position might have one result one time, but a different result the next time. But there are some good tests you can run that will have meaningful results, like using multiple instances. Many of our publishers manage a very heavy waterfall with a lot of instances, and it takes a lot of work and time and effort. So what you could do is test a heavy waterfall versus a light waterfall. Heavy having a lot of instances, light having less instances, and then really decide if managing the heavy waterfall is worth the effort. There's also country versus worldwide optimization. Is it better to have specific country waterfalls or a worldwide waterfall? You can split test it and find out. Cross promotion. There's always a question of where to place cross promotion in the waterfall. Should it be high in the waterfall ahead of all the networks, in the middle somewhere, or lower in the backfill position? You can test that very easily with our A/B testing tool. On a side note, we just released a really awesome new tool for cross promotion that will help simplify it for both UA and monetization managers. We're doing a webinar on that next month, so be sure to tune in. Most importantly, we can test in-app bidding versus a traditional waterfall. It really makes more money than the current methods. So you can test it and find out. Great, now let's go over how the tool works. I'll remind everyone here that in order to use our A/B testing tool, you must be using ironSource Mediation as your mediation platform. There are 4 stages to set up a test from end to end. You create it, then configure the settings, then monitor and report, and then lastly, you deploy the winner. Let's review each stage. So the first is you define your test name and your description. You want to do this to track your test, so you know what you're running now, but also the tests that you've run in the past. And then you decide the traffic variation between groups. So are each group getting a 50-50 split? Are you doing an 80-20 split? You choose that now. Then you input the unique instance IDs for group B. This is super important is because it's the only way we can accurately track revenue between group A and B. Without having unique instance IDs, the results that you see from the reporting would be unreliable. Next is you configure the settings. When the test is active, we will expose to you a toggle on the platform. You can see it in the little GIF image here. One side is A, which is yellow, and then you toggle it over to group B, which is purple. In the example, B, you're testing Vungle in first position. On each group, group B primarily, you're applying changes only to group B. Then you want to monitor and track the performance. Our A/B testing module has a overview reports page that compares results between groups for both the overall performance and also each individual ad unit. We are tracking all the major and important KPIs for you, like revenue, eCPM, retention, and ARPDAU, so you can see how the 2 groups are performing against each other. So once you've had a test live for enough time and you've done your analysis and you're confident on which is best, then you want to choose the winning group. You can do that very easily in our dashboard. And once you choose the winning group, we will apply all of the configurations from that group to your users 100%. Now we're going to review some of the best practices for A/B testing. This is not only for doing testing with ironSource, but A/B testing in general. First is you pick one variable at a time. You probably have lots of ideas about the tests you want to run, but they need to be tested one at a time. For example, you don't want to add a new network into your stack while also adjusting the reward of a placement. Any impact on the performance, you won't be able to know which had the most impact. So you should definitely do both of those tests, just do them individually. Next is you want to leave your control group alone. Group A, your control group, should be untouched. Any A/B test should always be testing against the current implementation to find if the new idea is better or worse. Next is identify your goal. What KPIs do you want to see improve? And also know which have the most weight. If one of your tests yields revenue higher 20%, but retention is down 10%, you should know which is most important so you can make your decision. Next is test in increments. Small changes can have a major impact. So you want to start your test small and then expand it from there before going 100% to make sure that the results are consistent across the board. Next is give it enough time to run. A test needs to have a useful amount of data to give you good results. we recommend that you give a test 2 to 3 day runtime before you can start learning about the results. And then after you have the runway of 2 to 3 days, you should then have it run for a minimum of 2 weeks. Last but not least is always be testing. Once you start a test, you should always have the next test queued up and ready to go. Small incremental changes can add up to a lot of revenue. So the more you're testing, it means you're always improving your strategy. So that's it for our presentation. Now we'll take a look at some of the questions that came in. Cool, so let's see, the first one is, you mentioned running tests on segments of users. Do the segments need to be set up in ironSource if I want to do segments tests? So they do. In our segments tool, we have a really easy way to create the segment. It also depends on what kind of segment you want to run. So some of segments, ironSource will know already. If you want to do a segment based off a device type or maybe an operating system or even location of users. But some segments like paying users or like player progression, we don't know that. So that's something that you would have to tell us through an SDK implementation. Okay, the next question is, can you do 3+ test groups at the same time? Example, A control versus B Vungle in first and C ironSource in first. That's a great question. Right now, it's A/B testing only, which means you only test 2 groups or 2 ideas at the same time. That doesn't mean that it will stay that way forever. We might release in the new phases of the A/B testing tool the option to do A, B, C, D, E testing. The next question is there a minimum amount of traffic to test the group that the test group needs to be allocated? Also a very good question. You want to make sure that any test that you run that you have statistically significant data. So if your app doesn't have a high DAU or a lot of impressions, starting with, for example, 10% of users might not give the B group enough data to have good results. So I don't know if I have exactly a benchmark for you, but for learning eCPMs, you probably want to have, tens of thousands of impressions allocated to the B group in order to trust the results that come in. Let's see. If we have a new app, when should we start A/B testing? I guess that depends on kind of resources that you have. If you're just launching an app from scratch, you already have your initial plan of how the ads are implemented. You probably want to let that implementation run for a while and see how it's performing for you. And then after you have maybe a couple weeks or a month maybe of a brand new app launched and you have a baseline of how the ads are performing, at that point you can start running your A/B tests and challenging the ideas that you launched with. Another question is, would my R&D team need to do anything before I start setting up the tests, or can I do it without them? Also, great question. One of the best parts about our tool is that it doesn't require any R&D work to run the test itself. So the allocation of the traffic, controlling the settings in the dashboard is all done by the monetization manager, and there's no R&D work needed at all. The only time you might need some R&D work is if you want to, for example, integrate interstitial when you've never had it before. You will need to have your team do that first, but once that's done, then the rest of it is controlled fully from the dashboard, and you don't need your dev team for that anymore. The next question is there a specific order of tests I should do? Should I do a waterfall test before an ad unit? I wouldn't say that there's a specific order that will apply to everyone. I think that it really depends on the stage of your app and how much ad integration you've done already. So if you're an app that already has all 3 of our ad units integrated, or 4 rather, but offer wall, banner, interstitial, and rewarded video, then obviously you don't want to do another ad unit test. There's not any more ad units to add. So you would start with something else like new placements or capping and pacing or waterfall tests. But if you're at a different stage where you only have 1 ad unit live and you are considering another one, that kind of test would probably have more impact than others. So you would want to start there first. Okay, the next one is, okay, there's one here. Is it a best practice to segment players who engage with rewarded video and reduce the interstitial frequency for this group? So for example, rewarded video engagers will have 1 minute interstitial ad frequency instead of 30 seconds so that they can continue to engage with rewarded video more freely. That is a great test. There's not a best practice yet. I don't know that we have exactly data to share of a publisher that has run this exact test that we can give you the results of, but you have a great idea. And I think that if you're using our platform and you're using our mediation, you should absolutely run this test and be in touch with us so we can follow up with you on the results of that test. Okay, another one that's come in is, does ironSource offer stats to help conclude statistical significance of the test in their tool? If so, please describe. Very, very good question. At the moment, our tool does not have statistical significance, although we've done a lot of interviews and gotten a lot of feedback with clients who are actively using the tool, and it's definitely one of the components we want to add. So we're soon going to release a phase 2 of the tool where we'll have a lot more enhancements. So I think you can expect to see that coming up. Here, another question is, what is the definition of LTV in your dashboard? The lifetime user value is measured by the way ironSource can measure it. So we don't really offer specifically an LTV metric because the LTV of every user is different. But if ironSource's SDK is initialized when on every app open, what we do know is every time the user comes in and also how much revenue is made from that user. So in our cohorts reports, you can look at average revenue per user, and we offer that up to 60 days of cohorted data. And the next question is, this seems like a first to market feature since there's no R&D or tech work. Do any other competitors have something similar? We do know of a competitor that has an A/B testing feature also. From what we understand, is only limited to waterfall A/B testing. Also from what we know about it, they don't require unique instance IDs to run that waterfall test. So we're not exactly sure how they're reporting the data or how a publisher knows the results of the test. But from all of the competitive analysis that we've done, our A/B testing tool is for sure the most robust in that you can do more than just waterfall testing. You can do ad units, content, segments test, just like I said in the presentation. You mentioned 2 weeks is the minimum time to run. How is that amount figured? It doesn't have to run for 2 weeks. You're allowed to run it for less. I recommend it as a best practice is because when you're launching a test, it takes time for the new settings to really like learn and equalize. And I think that 2 weeks is generally a good amount of time to see some stabilization of the data and the performance so you can make an educated decision based off that. And the next question is, can I use the A/B test tool for UA purposes? So this tool specifically is a monetization tool. We do have a dedicated user acquisition team, also our team called Playworks, which does all kinds of A/B testing for some of our clients on testing different creatives and that kind of thing. So there's no tool in the platform for it, but reach out to whoever you can and you work with an ironSource, and we can tell you how we can help you A/B test on the UA side. The next question is, would I ever want to run the same A/B test a few months down the road to validate the results from the first test? I think that's a great idea, especially with waterfall tests. Like I said, those can change from time to time depending on which networks you're working with, how the networks you're working with are performing. But just because you got one result one time, it doesn't mean that it won't be, it will be the same the next time, especially if your app is developing. Are you adding new features? Has your app grown its user base? Have you done a bunch of new things? Then maybe you'll want to test something again. This question is, I've never created or worked with waterfalls before. Is it better to leave my networks on auto optimization or just try to create a basic waterfall to begin testing multiple instances? Do you start slow and add one instance at a time and optimize, or fully abandon the auto optimization and create several CPM floors for each network and try to A/B test to optimize from there? I would say that there's not one answer to this. Also, this is another great way to A/B test. It sounds like you have a couple tests you can do already within your question. It also depends on the resources you have as a team. Many of our clients, some who have more resources than others, are managing very complex manual waterfalls with multiple line items. They've determined for them that that's the best method. Others are managing more simple waterfalls or a mixture of manual priorities and auto optimization. I wouldn't say that there's one best answer for everybody, but if you have resources to put towards it, then running these kinds of tests should absolutely help you figure out what's best for you and your game. And the next question is, are there any particular variables that you would suggest testing for non-game apps using ironSource? It depends on, I guess, what kind of unit you're testing. So rewarded videos are normally more popular with the gaming category, just because games have economies and currencies that they can reward, although it's possible to also have that in non-game apps. But for display units like interstitial and banner, which are more common for non-gaming apps, I think that some of the examples I gave, like testing the frequency of the interstitials, testing the X button, those are all things about the ads that you would want to understand the best performance, regardless of the kind of app that you have. Okay, let's see, we have another question here about how many A/B tests can I run at once? So based on the best practice, you definitely want to test only one thing at a time. And also on our platform, we only let you run one A/B test per app, but you can be running one A/B test on all of your apps. So if you have 5 apps, you can be running 5 A/B tests at a time. There's just only one test you should be running on one app at any given time. Okay, I think that we're getting to the end of our time here. I really hope this was useful, and everyone, I hope I answered most of your questions. We're going to send you a recording of the video very soon, and thanks for joining, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye.